Okay, so good. So welcome, Alida Sandison, to our seminar series on thinking about, at this stage, thinking about living along with and together with the pandemic. This is our 13th seminar. I hope that's a lucky number for some. And we have shifted our focus slightly towards thinking about living with and through this pandemic, because it's a difficult it's a difficult thing to understand. We have tried to some extent in the beginning of our series to try to negotiate how do we think through and understand the pandemic, but we are also very learning how to, or thinking about how to live with it. So that's part of what we're going to be asking Alida. How do you negotiate living with a difficult person? Let's put it that way, if you're stuck with them for an awfully long time. So enough from me. Alida, welcome. Very nice to have you here. I'm going to ask you to sort of introduce yourself, and I'm going to disappear, and then I will return once you're finished to help negotiate questions and comments. If you do have comments, I'm now talking to the people who have logged in. It would be, I think, to maybe put them on the chat if you'd like. Otherwise, wave your hand or turn on your video. Somehow indicate to me that you'd like to chat. Those are the three options that you can use, whichever feels more comfortable for you. And I will try to help Alida negotiate at the end of her talk. All right, thank you. Over to you, Alida. Try and get rid of myself.
All right. Thank you. Okay, so Andrea and myself have often talked about how with difficult personalities there is often a narcissistic element. And I've spent some time thinking about that, because I think that we can all go through periods of being slightly narcissistic and have slightly narcissistic moments. And I think that is part of life and actually quite normal. But when we talk about narcissistic personalities, that is a little bit different. You know, when as people, any person is going through a difficult time, I think it becomes quite difficult to focus on others. We can become quite self-focused. But narcissism isn't just about a self-focus or self-absorption. So when we talk about narcissism, there's actually a whole lot of theory behind that. Now, let me actually say who I am. I'm a senior lecturer in the psychology department, and my interest area for research is narcissism and antisocial behavior. And so what I strive to do usually is to understand what the theory says the narcissistic personality structure would be like, and then to kind of track that out in the personality and see that the theory actually predicts correctly. Okay, so if we just talk general definitions of narcissism, I think what narcissistic personalities are known for is an inflated sense of their importance. So it goes beyond just that confidence level, and it goes more into the realm of a grandiosity, superiorness. And they often require a lot of attention, and it becomes evident over time that they actually really don't feel a lot of empathy towards others because they struggle to move out of their own position. So another definition has similar wording: grandiosity, lack of empathy, needing admiration, self-centered, but can be manipulative and demanding to get that attention. I think for me, the biggest components are the lack, first of all, the lack of empathy, the lack of ability to see the world through somebody else's shoes. And there seems to be a fair instability in their self-image. Now, narcissists often, they have very superficial good functioning, but when you get into an intimate relationship or a close relationship, you actually start to see the feelings of unworthiness and the instability coming through. And it means that they usually have quite conflicted close relationships. And a strong feeling of entitlement to be treated in a particular way. That you should give them what they need, what they want, and that their view is the right view. Okay, but as I said, narcissism is a broad concept, and we can all be slightly narcissistic, and that would be normal and more self-asserting. But if it's pathological, it's going to be a lot more self-centered, self-indulgent, and a lot more difficulty to see the other person's point of view, a lot more conflict. Okay, so to be able to look at the mechanisms that narcissism use, which is really where we're going to in terms of understanding narcissism in lockdown, I just want to talk to you very quickly about how the sense of self forms. All of us, when we are little, have interactions with our caregiver, and they might laugh when we laugh and say, "Oh, isn't she cute?" You know, and we get this affirmation and pattern that develops between us and our parent, whether they are breastfeeding, whether they are changing a nappy. And those patterns have good feelings and bad feelings attached to them. For pathological narcissists, they will often develop an environment where they actually don't get a lot of good patterns. And the patterns that they develop between them and their caregiver are often very negative. That sense of, oh, what does this child want now? There is a negative association that starts to develop with their needs, their wants, and what they are like in the world. And they really struggle to develop a positive sense of self. So that they have lots of little light switches or patterns that form. But in terms of the words and the patterns that make up their sense of self, you have this kind of situation where the good patterns are actually very few, and there's a lot more patterns associated with what does this child want now? Why is this child always crying? You know, the negative associated interaction with the child. Now, it's quite normal for that child to then want to hold on to their positive sense of self, to protect a feeling of positivity. But there's so much negative being reflected to them that they use particular defense mechanisms. And those defense mechanisms in narcissism are actually quite predictable. And that's actually what I want us to look at today. If we think about the narcissistic personality as an injured personality and using mechanisms to protect and maintain that they actually really are good, it's those mechanisms that seem to annoy us. And although they have a purpose, they do tend to cause conflict with others. So the first mechanism that the narcissist will use is the one that we know them for, and that is the grandiosity. They will attribute very positive qualities to themselves, like having, you know, living in the best place ever compared to the rest of the world. And particularly their qualities are, you know, they are the most fantastic leader, and they are always there for other people. There's an attribution that is much more than could possibly be. And over time, what will happen is people will start to realize that they're actually not quite as good as what they sell themselves to be. In psychological language, we could call that omnipotence, but it really is grandiosity, showing other people how good I am. And why do narcissistic people do that? Because their sense of self, the good self, is so little and so fragile that they almost need to assign it extra qualities to buffer it up. Now, what is important to know with the defense mechanisms is that it happens unconsciously, that they don't actually realize that it's false, and that there's a part of them that will truly believe the buffering up. They will really believe that that is who they are, because they are invested in being that, because they're trying to protect the self. But of course, the more they say how good they are and others realize they're not, the more irritating it just becomes to have this person sell themselves in a way that they really are not. Then, the other thing that narcissistic people do is they idealize. And that means that they will find people or things in their world that are objectively really good, and then try to associate with that person or thing. Okay, this is my friend, and she is the head of the varsity, right? And the idea is that by being friends with that person, I am better than I actually am. And again, it's another buffering technique, another technique that is used to increase that positive sense of self. What that looks like practically is if the narcissistic person is trying to idealize you, there's going to be a lot of flattery of you and a lot of, oh, you're so good at this and we are the same. So there is trying to create this bond between me and this person, or me and this project, to show just how good I am. Usually that isn't too problematic. It can get a bit irritating if it's over the top, but sometimes people just feel a self-esteem boost. They don't necessarily get hurt by that. But it can get irritating, particularly in an intimate relationship, when somebody wants an authentic connection. Let's say you are going to go and write an exam and you're talking to your partner saying, oh, I'm just so nervous, I don't feel like I've learned enough. And this person goes, but my angel, you're so clever. And of course you're just going to, ace this. And the person's real vulnerability and authentic need is not considered, because the narcissistic person is so involved in idealizing them, because the narcissist needs them to be that good. They need the association to that idealized good. When they have the association with the idealized good, whether it is in a person or a project, they will often try and control it. So then you will find the narcissistic person dictating to their other person, their intimate other, how to be or what to do. And that's where the narcissistic person goes into the realm of being manipulative and controlling. On a theoretical level, what it's about is that when the narcissistic person idealizes someone, their boundary blurs, and they actually stop recognizing where they stop and the other person starts. So they will manipulate the other person because they actually experience an us, it's we, and they feel entitled to make a decision about the other person, because they literally feel like this is an extension of them. The other person is going to get frustrated, because depending on how strong the control is, it can feel very constricting, and it can get very manipulative and irritating. And the other person will start to realize that this person doesn't really have my best interest at heart. They're doing this for them. So if you were in lockdown with someone like this and that controlling element came through, they're very likely to start to control where you go and what you do, but now you are in a fairly close, intimate space, and it's very difficult then to put the boundaries down and actually say, no, I'm not going to do that. And that then becomes a source of conflict. Okay, so up to date, we have to control this positive sense of self. The person's going to up their self-descriptions and become grandiose. They're going to probably idealize either their intimate other or their projects and make them excellent and world-class. And then they're also going to try and control those people and projects to the utmost of what they can, which is then going to become very frustrating. Okay. 3 more things that narcissistic people do. They tend to ignore things that are not to their benefit. And again, these mechanisms are all unconscious. So if you challenge them on it, they're not going to be able to acknowledge that this is what they do. But they're going to ignore the pieces of the argument that hold no emotional relevance to them. So if you forgot to make them a cup of coffee this morning, they're going to tell you, oh, I can't believe you're so selfish. We've been together for so long, and yet you still do not consider me. But yet, they do not remember that last night you cooked supper, that you cleaned the house, that you did this and that. It's in that moment that holds emotional relevance, and you didn't make the coffee. So they will block out the bits that that don't come into the argument at that moment for them. It becomes particularly confusing when their attitude shifts, when they pick the piece of the argument and yesterday they felt one way, but today they feel another. So you can get these attitude shifts, which can get very frustrating because there's then a lack of continuity. And it can become quite obvious that it's because it doesn't serve them for the moment. And then they can appear very selfish. And then again becomes a source of arguments and discontent between people because that's not what you said yesterday. And why are you now changing your mind? And the narcissistic individual is going to find that yesterday's argument really didn't. I know I thought that yesterday, but you know, that's not it. What is happening now and what fits into my argument now is what is relevant. Then we have devaluation. Okay. When you no longer serve a narcissist, they will dismiss you. So what that means is when aligning with you, you're the idealized object, you're going to help them get a job, you're going to help them, I don't know, further something. And when you can no longer do that, you become irrelevant. So either it means that the bond you thought was there with this person is actually just gone. It's dismissed and you're left going, okay, what happened? Or they can actually go as far as an active destruction of you. So they can tell you how bad you are. And this is the part where narcissists can become quite damaging and hurtful and cause injury, because they are likely to now tell you how bad you are because you don't serve them anymore. And the other person can then be in a position where there's a lot of anger or irritability or unhappiness lodged at them. But they haven't actually done anything different. It's the narcissistic person that's shifted. All right. So this is difficult. If we go back to the example of the cup of coffee, in that moment, you didn't make me coffee. So this relationship is no longer what I thought it was, because you do not consider me. So we have the denial of everything that happened yesterday. But now I take it a step further and I said, you know, you've always just been such a selfish person, and I've always struggled with your selfishness, and I don't know why you have to treat me this way. So there's an actual attack on something that the person has perceived, the narcissistic person has perceived in the interaction between you, that is used to devalue you. If you are locked down with someone in close confines, this is the element that is going to be the most difficult, because there's a level at which there's a projection onto you. And now what happens is, sorry, I'm skipping slides. I want you to look at the bottom half of this slide. It says you either internalize it and alter your reality, or you distance and defend. And I think those are the most common mechanisms that people do. I've really just forgotten to make you coffee. It's just coffee. All right. But at that moment, I am told that I'm selfish, and I'm the most selfish person in the world, basically. Now, either I'm going to look at that and think, shit, are you right? Am I really selfish? And I'm going to start to examine that. Then I'm either going to go, oh, you know, you might have a point. I really do need to consider you more. Then I internalize and start to believe that I'm a selfish person. Then I have altered my reality, and I've altered my experience of myself. My other alternative, most common alternative, is to go, ah, crap, man, you're just in a mood, and to throw the selfish comment back at the person, right? I think that there are certain narcissistic individuals that might be unsophisticated. So when you get something that is being leveled at you, it becomes a lot easier to say, no, that's not right, I'm not selfish. But when you get someone who's very sophisticated and they start to, you know, be more subtle about it and actually sit you down and say, you know, Alida, I've noticed that you can actually be quite selfish, and I'm not saying this to hurt you, but I'm really on your side, and I want you to be the best you that you can be. So then you have the manipulation coming in, and it becomes then very tricky to spot what is projected at you and not take it on. Okay, so let's just summarize. That's really the story. These are the mechanisms, within this theory, the mechanisms that are used by narcissistic personalities. They're used unconsciously. So the narcissistic person will truly experience their reality that way. And they are either going to buffer up their self, align with someone to buffer up the self and try and control that. Or if that starts to work and starts to not feed the self enough, they're going to either just ignore or going to start to devalue this person and tell them why it is that who they are is not good enough. In terms of the interpersonal process, it becomes very important for the person to be able to spot it when things are being projected at them, and to be able to really look at it and say, is this serving you or is it serving me? You know, is there an accurate element of information here? Because the narcissist's argument is always in order to defend their position and their self. And so to get into a mature working through of a difficulty within a relationship is very difficult, because they really are going to struggle to see things from your perspective. And if you are in close confines with them and can't leave, these can become very tricky dynamics to negotiate. And you then have to actually be very boundaried and very careful in spotting these things in order to protect yourself. Okay, guys, that's really what I wanted to say. So short and sweet.
Alida, thank you. That was very, very fascinating. And I would very much like to ask 1,000 questions, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going because I have, beyond the seminar access to you, so I can. So what I would like to do is ask anybody who would like to ask questions to maybe just pop them up on chat. And what I'll do is pose the questions to you from the chat one by one. Paul is very much interested in the use of self-harm and self-loathing and manipulating to get attention, claiming that they are depressed, anxious, socially inept, but communicating this to all and sundry. I'm assuming it's the narcissist who uses those kinds of techniques to yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
I think that I understand it as there are two prominent types of narcissists. One of them is more grandiose orientated and is going to tell you how good they are. The other is more victim orientated, and they are, I guess, more connected to that very large bad self quality. So they are very aware of the negative light switches that have made up their personality in their development. You know, when they grew up, there was a lot of negative that was lodged at them. And so they may very well experience themselves as anxious, as socially inept, as depressed, because it's very difficult for them. Most people are able to take their positive qualities and their negative qualities together and say, yes, I get anxious, but you know what, I'm also really humorous and I'm also very kind. But narcissistic people, when they connect to that negative in themselves, they really struggle to connect to the positive at the same time. So they become very overwhelmed by that experience of negative. And when they have aligned to you and you become their object, they then feel entitled to manipulate you. I'm so broken, you need to help. So there's a level at which that idealization happens, and the other person is better off and can help them, but they use their brokenness as leverage to make the other person help them. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. Alida, gaslighting. That Janet would like to know what that is exactly.
Okay, so that fits in exactly with the defense mechanisms. Gaslighting is when I tell you something, when I project onto you. You are a very selfish person, you haven't made coffee, you've always been this way. I don't understand where your selfishness has come from. When I'm rewriting what is happening in the interpersonal space, I'm putting a slant to it, a negative slant, that is going to benefit me but make you bad. Then I'm gaslighting you, and I'm getting you to question your reality. That element comes out strongly. By what I lodge at you, you then question whether you understood it right, whether you saw it right, maybe you missed something, did we experience the same thing? I'm questioning my reality because of your strongly worded comments.
A quick added question there. Can gaslighting also be positive? I mean, if the narcissist blows you up into an absolute hero figure, but you're not necessarily then questioning your reality, you might enjoy that reality. Would that also be gaslighting?
Gaslighting is always spoken about in a negative context, but the mechanism is exactly the same. The mechanism of providing the person with a reality that they then need to kind of double check to see, is this actually what is happening? And then again, I have the decision to make about whether I take that interpretation on or not. It's a similar thing.
Okay, thanks, man. Gary is asking, do societies have personalities? So is South Africa a kind of a victim narcissist? The broken one, I suppose.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment. I think that that there would be a fair amount of victim narcissists in our country. That makes sense to me. Having so many difficulties and people being in contact with those difficulties and trying to cope with them in whichever way they can, which may very well lead to these kinds of mechanisms.
Careful. I'm teasing. Sharon wants to know whether, how does one understand the narcissist that had a very supportive and loving family or caregivers? So presumably there could be people that had that, and so that wouldn't be what is causing the narcissism or underlying it. Can there be other reasons for narcissism to develop?
There are a variety of reasons. On a very temperament level, people have a tendency to, on a temperament level, to edge more towards anxious or negative interactions. So if I have the kind of temperament that is going to be able to more easily create patterns with my caregivers that have things like anxiety, fear, anger attached to them, it becomes a lot more difficult for me to make patterns that have joy and contentment and kind of love attached to them. So it could be that the caregiver isn't necessarily directly consciously harmful or even unconsciously harmful. It's
Yeah, we seem to have lost a leader. Let's give her a few minutes and see maybe if she'll reconnect with us. I hope it's not load shedding. Is it me that has vanished? Ah, there you are. You're back again.
No,
Alida, you disappeared for a few seconds. I was wondering if I disappeared or if you had.
Oh, it wasn't me. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, great. All right. Okay, maybe. Did you finish chatting?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh. So there are lots of questions. Let me just. Sorry, I missed the. So where was I? Do you think COVID? This is from Margaret. Do you think COVID gave narcissists more power in terms of using fear as a measure of control and limiting? Do you think that COVID?
I have no evidence on this, but theoretically it would fit, because now you have a far more controlled environment and the narcissist is able to control better because their loved ones are in their direct space and cannot leave. So it almost gives permission, because there's an actual real scientific argument. You cannot leave or you're going to get sick. I do think that it very much lends to feed into that controlling dynamic.
And one of the questions I actually missed, I'm sorry, Janet, the difference between narcissism and antisocial personality disorder?
Okay, so if you are antisocial, you are also narcissistic. if you are narcissistic, you aren't necessarily antisocial, and it has to do with the level at which the person is able to develop their conscience, their capacity for guilt. Now, you can get very involved in it theoretically, but ultimately what happens is in the process of developing the personality, there are certain things that need to form, and part of that is your moral code. So the narcissist, even though they can be manipulative, is still going to have a moral code. They're still going to have a level of morality, even though they might use that morality to their benefit. Whereas the antisocial personality, their moral code becomes more and more injured. So there's, depending on how severe it is, there can be a lot less guilt. And that's one of the big differences between the two.
Alida, Nikki asking a question that's also very much upper mind for me, maybe for quite a lot of us here. How does someone respond when narcissists boast about themselves and belittle you in front of family, for instance, or in front of anybody? How do you respond to a narcissist? That's, I mean, yeah, I know it's a very big question.
That is a big question. That's a very big question. I think you need to know what they're doing. And I mean, there's an intuitive understanding of what they're doing. They're making themselves appear great to be better than what they are. And part of the mechanism to do that is to devalue you. I think it just depends on which battle you want to pick. Because this is the mechanism that they're going to use. And I think if you have a narcissist who is going to be consistently in your space that you cannot distance from, you are going to want to draw a boundary that says you don't do this in public. You don't get to do that. I would probably acknowledge or kind of stroke the good self first and say, you know, I really know that you are good at this, but when you talk about it, please don't at the same time say, you know, if you're going to address it with them, I'd stroke the good first so that you can get a slightly less defensive reaction. And approach, does it make sense? Approach it that way so that there is an element of affirming them, because the mechanism is to affirm their sense of self. And then and then you might need to decide if you want to escalate it from there in terms of kind of addressing it while they're doing it in a humorous way. Whether they'll take it well or not, I think is going to depend on them and how much it triggers them.
So it takes an awful amount of strength to be able to live with a narcissist. You've got to love them very much.
I think so, because you're going to get a lot of that negative lodged at you, and the difficulty is that can really break you down. It can really make you question yourself, which is why Nikki's question is a particularly good one, because you are going to want to put boundaries in place to protect yourself. And there are going to be times where you have to say, don't do that. But the best way to put that boundary down and say don't do that is to be firm, but to also affirm them first, so that they are reminded of your care before you challenge, because you are challenging a fragile self.
Okay, so lots of investment in if you are, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in here, but I'm just very eager to know that if you have been turned into a bad object by a narcissistic person, can you turn that around?
it can be turned around, but it's not always in your control. So remember that the narcissist is going to turn you bad when you no longer feed their experience of their good self. Now, it can either be that it's just lost narcissistic fuel for them, which means you haven't changed, the situation hasn't changed, but they're so used to it, it no longer becomes rewarding. Either that, or you've actually got to generate more narcissistic fuel for them. So be more affirming, be more flattering, and that takes us then in the realm of starting to feel slightly more inauthentic. A lot of the time, that switch is not in your control. And it can actually be very hurtful. So you would need to make a decision about whether it is worthwhile investing in all the positive stroking to be able to see if this person can switch you back. If it's, you know, if it's a boss, then it might be something that you need to consider, because you need to be in a good position effectively for work.
Okay, thank you. Belinda is asking, okay, so she says, I speak about and research bullying quite a lot, and narcissism always comes up. So this is back to work, perhaps. And what I find fascinating is how the role of echo from the original Greek myth is downplayed in our modern ideas about narcissism. Remember, narcissus and echo are kind of a pair in the Greek myth. Echo was cursed to only repeat what Narcissus said, so he only hears his own voice back at himself. And note the gender. Would this then constitute being caught in a codependent relationship where the cycle is just repeated over and over again? People who are bullied often fall into such a pattern with the bully.
Yeah, there's a known dynamic between your antisocial or narcissistic personality that hooks either the borderline or the dependent. And basically what it means is that when you have a personality type that is slightly more dependent, you're more easily manipulated. And when your position is challenged, your view of reality is challenged, you're going to be more inclined to say, yes, I'm sorry, I was selfish, I didn't make the coffee, I promise I'll do better tomorrow. And that then just creates a codependency, and the person just takes on the feedback and fits in and tries to give the narcissist what they want. And it is a bullying pattern. So that definitely is a thing.
Paul is referring back to Nikki's question, but I must admit I'm kind of like in a kind of a flow of a present, and I can't remember what the question was, but he says maybe the reply would be to say that is according to them. I think it was about belittling you in your family context. So I think, Paul, we're going to need a little bit more detail. I'm not quite sure what you mean. Maybe type up a kind of clarification, and we'll come down to it. Quickly before that, can narcissism be cured? That's Gary.
I guess that depends on which theoretical position you want to take. Freud said no. I can't say that narcissism it's difficult, because part of the projecting onto you, part of making you bad, means that they are never wrong. And that's one of the difficult things we experience with narcissistic people, is even if we had to say, you know, it's not cool when you say negative things about me in public, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually say, yes, I'm sorry, that was mean. They're more likely to say, "Ach man, don't be so sensitive," and make it you again. And when it's always you and they don't take responsibility, you just get stuck in a pattern that just doesn't move. So usually it's the other person that goes to therapy, not the narcissist. And then it's really difficult for the narcissist to actually realize there's a problem here and it's me. So can it be cured? Well, I can't say that it's impossible, but I can say that it's very unlikely that serious narcissists are motivated enough to want to change anything.
A question from Christy: can a narcissistic parents induce borderline in a child? You'll maybe have to explain what borderline is.
That's a tough question. Okay, borderline. Okay, think about the borderline uses the same dynamics as a narcissist, but borderline moves quicker. So although I'm bad this morning because I didn't make you coffee, your angel and your gift from God 2 hours later when I come and rub your back. There's a switch that happens with borderline, which basically reflects a serious instability in the person, and others experience them as unstable, impulsive, lacking continuity, and they're likely to experience themselves that way too. I'm trying to answer that question in terms of if with a narcissistic parent, because they struggle with boundaries, they will often have an idealized view of their children, and their children must be the A student, they must be the top sport candidate, you know, because if the child does well, the narcissist does well. They will experience the child's award as their own award, because they can't tell the difference between the child and them. Would that create a possibility for borderline in the child? I'm sure it could, because it's very difficult to experience your own sense of self when you are merged into your parent all the time. The parent isn't able to say, sure, my child is training too hard and taking strain here. I really think she needs to tone down the training. The narcissistic parent is going to be stuck on, but she's doing so well and she's getting awards and she needs to keep going because, you know, we're doing well. When you aren't seen, you cannot be affirmed. When you aren't seen as a separate person, and then it becomes very difficult to form your own stable sense of self. So I don't know what the stats are, but I certainly could understand that it's difficult. It would become very difficult as an adult to then need to learn to actually experience yourself as separate, and establish a stable self. Okay.
So, in a way, and back to the kind of the political, I see we have an exchange here. So we're doomed to be focused as South Africans on our reflection forever if narcissism can't be cured. Perhaps there's maybe it's a bit of an extension to put narcissism onto a whole social
yeah, I think we'd be able to probably say that we might have more victim or vulnerable narcissists, but I'm not sure that I'd pin it to the whole country. And although the personality structure can't be cured, there are certain things that we can do. So a part of that is to try and break out of this all good, all bad mentality. To be able to say, it's not that I'm your angel and it's not that I'm completely selfish. I could have moments where I'm both these things. Let's take that to a country level. It's not that it's all bad, or that, you know, the country doesn't get anything right, or, you know, that we have no issues. That there needs to be a dialogue that is able to acknowledge both of those positions. That's the dialogue that challenges the narcissistic dynamic. That doesn't need to idealize or to devalue, but can actually say, well, there's elements of these things that I don't like, there's elements that I like, and that's okay.
So that, just to add on there, something that's related to what Gary is doing is this idea of complexity thinking, that you need to be able to hold complex dynamics in your mind. But the interesting thing is that we're not hardwired for complexity. It's something we have to train ourselves in, and it's extremely difficult to do. So we would have to embrace complexity thinking in order to deal with a narcissist, but that requires an enormous amount of sophistication and training too. So I'm quite negative about the thought of being able to deal with narcissisms, except maybe, you know, get them ducked into the bloody pond they're staring into. But let me not go there. Janet is taking the conversation towards political leaders. Are they, many of them, narcissists? Do you have to be narcissistic to want to be a leader, and particularly a political leader?
Well, I don't think you have to, but it does work out that many are. And we have a few prime examples in the world at the moment. So there is a certain level at which the self is affirmed and buffered when I'm in a power position, in authority, in the limelight. I get to make decisions and I get to control, and that is endorsed. So yes, there is a link.
So then, I mean, Janet is attaching this to the idea of toxic leadership. So I'm imagining if you have a narcissist who wants to lead, that is almost inevitably going to lead to the idea of toxic leadership. I'm imagining the best leaders are the ones that just simply don't want the job and are, you know, corralled into it. But if you desperately want to lead, okay, sorry, me talking again.
It's fine. No, I think I can follow your train of thought there. I think of a political leader that says, my whole country is this way and you guys are bad. You know, it becomes really difficult to connect to the nuances of what different people are like and what different people need. If I need to create an idealized whole because they are an extension of me. I think the toxic leadership for me would then be in the difficulty to admit when we've made bad decisions or when we need to do things differently. That challenges my idea of myself.
Sorry, there was just a bit of interference there. And then you could turn that back into a kind of a personal scenario as well as a political scenario, where a person who's determined to lead and control a kind of a family unit or a partnership would also turn toxic as a leader.
Yeah, because their family unit in particular really would become, they would feel that on an unconscious level, they're an extension of them. So it's very difficult for the narcissistic person to look at what an individual needs when it's different to what they need, because they can't see that person as separate. And it's almost like that narcissistic person needs practice to be able to hold that complexity. They need to be able to be encouraged to keep holding the complexity, so that they see the good and the bad, and their person is not either all good or all bad.
Okay, so Janet comments that Alida has noted that the narcissist will never admit to being wrong. So you could be a strong leader, but you can't self-reflect.
Yes.
And can you be a strong leader if you can't self-reflect? You can't be a good leader. Maybe you can be a better, strong bullying one. It's coming out. Alida, we have about 5 minutes or so. So everyone, Alida. So 1 or 2 more questions. I see there's a question quickly from Belinda. the same question applies to corporate leadership. That's what Linda's saying. Snakes in Suits is a...
it's a book.
Okay, lovely title. So a huge percentage of corporate leaders are narcissistic because that's where they get the unchallenged power and the payoff.
Put it to you this way: if I need to go in for and get a cardiologist, I'd choose the narcissist. They're going to be very confident in what they do, and in an emergency situation, they're probably not going to second guess themselves, and they're going to act. Similarly, in corporate, you have narcissistic individuals who channel their narcissism really well in making seriously hardcore decisions that take the business further. Does that mean success at work? Yeah, for sure, but at a high cost to people that might be working with them and to the people that might be in relationships with them. So narcissism can definitely be channeled well, but might not be a whole lot of fun when you are in an intimate setting and want to be seen as an individual.
So also, as Janet says, good for generals in a war.
Pretty much. Yes.
So we're talking very much about aggressive, active, kind of those kinds of positions. In those positions, narcissism might serve and does serve people well. Maybe back to Gary's question, are we then in a global culture in which those kinds of individuals succeed rather than, it depends on your measure of success, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an interesting point. Because you are going to have someone who's able to think big, dream big, and try to pursue that.
At an enormous cost.
At an enormous cost. And I think sometimes what narcissists are also sometimes known for is to dream too big. So then they don't necessarily have the follow through, and something can collapse because the dream was actually too big to start off with.
Yeah, or the overconfident slashing of your heart in heart surgery without thinking, you know, about...
Well, there is... Yeah.
Okay, I'm not certain I would choose the narcissist for anything. We, in a certain sense, run out of time. Maybe a few concluding words from Alida, but thank you very much. It was a fascinating, as Christy says in the chat session, fascinating topic. I'm sure we could be talking about this for months, but maybe we'll leave you to end us off. Oh dear, no, not that.
I think that my sense is that people find narcissism fascinating because sometimes it can just feel so irrational that people do and behave in a certain way. And yeah, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to chat about this a little bit more.
Okay, thanks very much, Alida. What I generally would like to do, as I try to do at the end of all of these, is just have a quick sort of flash of your face before you sort of say goodbye. So if you'd like to just turn on your video, say hi and bye. It was very lovely to see a whole lot of people here, and yeah, nice.
Thanks, Alida. Thanks, Alida.
Thanks so
nice
much.
To see you. Keep well here.
Thank you very much.
Saki, good to see you. Wow.
That's soon.
Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Christy.
Janet.
Hello, Sharon.
Hi.
Okay, so thank you
Hello,
very much, everybody, for joining. Thanks again, Alida. And I am going to do that dreadful sign off.
Exactly. All right. Bye.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.